fiscal devolution. Next week, we'll be talking about urban density. But as I said, today, we're talking about R&D and how that supports growth in different parts of the country. I think it's fair to say that everyone seems to be in favor of more R&D investment, or nearly everyone anyway. But there's a bit of less consensus, I think, on where and how that more investment should be invested. Some talk about following the research excellence model. Some focus on where businesses are invested, and public investment particularly should follow that. Some very much talk about levelling up and using it as a catch-up mechanism for places that are underperforming. And some undoubtedly say it can do all of that all at the same time and all at once. But I think there's also a little bit of less consensus around who should lead on deciding where and in what that investment should happen. So you've got different perspectives on central government on the one hand, combined authorities on the other, or technical bodies like the UKRI should be in the lead. And again, the answer is probably a bit of everything, but nevertheless, I think there's a less consensus around that. So those are some of the questions or some of the issues that my esteemed and wonderful panel today are going to explore. Let me introduce them and then we'll hear from them. We've got Onwurah, who's Labour MP for Newcastle Central and Shadow Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. We've got Lou Cordwell, who's Chair of Greater Manchester Business Board, founder and CEO of magneticNorth, Professor of Innovation at University of Manchester and central to the Innovation Greater Manchester Initiative, which I'm sure Lou will be talking to us about very shortly. And we've got Dr. Anna Valero, Director of the Centre for Economic Performance Growth Programme at LSE, as well as being a Distinguished Policy Fellow and a member of the Office for Budget Responsibilities Advisory Panel. So brilliant panel to discuss and explore these questions. The way we're going to try and do it is in a minute, Anna's going to kick us off, give us some big picture perspectives on the exam question, and then we'll try and get into some of the detail crudely in two chunks, but nevertheless, we'll get into detail. As always, those on the call, if you've got queries, comments, questions, you can stick them in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and I'll throw them into the conversation as appropriate. So, without further ado, big picture opening remarks. Anna, you kick us off.
Thank you, Andrew, and it's really great to be here to discuss how a place-based approach to R&D can create growth. Well, we know that growth is much needed in the UK, both on aggregate and also boosting the performance of places outside of London and the South East. We also know that increasing investment in innovation, with R&D being a key input into innovation, as well as fixed capital and skills, are key for boosting productivity and living standards. So as an advanced economy like the UK, innovation at the frontier is really important. We do have a role in inventing new technologies, and R&D is really important in that, in our kind of high growth firms and our universities, but also on diffusion. So that's the diffusion and the adoption of technologies and innovative practices in firms. Some of those might be invented here in the UK, others might be invented elsewhere. So in terms of place, it's natural to look at cities and city regions where most of the population live and work, where agglomerations of innovative firms can flourish in the right conditions. And within that, universities are a key source of strength for the UK at the national level, but also kind of anchor institutions that are present in our cities and across the country. So at an international level, the UK is home to top-rated universities across disciplines, with 4 UK universities in the top 10 in the QS Global rankings in 2020-23. And then in the World Intellectual Property Organization Global Innovation Index, in the 2023 index, the UK is 4th globally. And the strengths, when you look at all the subcategories that go into that, are really to do with our research output. So this is a really strong source of strength. And yes, a lot of that strength is in the Golden Triangle of Cambridge, Oxford, and London, but there's a lot of strength elsewhere in the country too. And that's where I think, innovation and clusters, they happen. The activities happen in places, and we do need to have more of an understanding of where those strengths are to inform these types of policies. So in some of my research, I've looked at the kind of broader economic impact of universities, and they do impact on local economies, both through economic spillovers and innovation spillovers, and the broader evidence base as well suggests that that's the case. But it's important to understand that it's not always the same impact. So the impacts tend to be stronger when there's more absorptive capacity, often measured through, say, human capital in the place that you're looking at, but also where there's closer relationships between university, research specialisms, and industrial structures. So it's really important to understand the big picture of the endowments, the capabilities in places to think about the potential for R&D investments to actually move the dial on living standards for the people who live there. So given the UK's comparative advantages on the world stage, which are primarily in high value added services, but also in areas of high value manufacturing, and our innovative specialisms in growing areas that are really relevant given the global challenges we face, such as clean tech, AI, biotechnology, life sciences, it's clear that we need to make more of the excellence in our innovation system across the country. So for city regions, this means understanding local specializations and strengths, as well as local barriers to maximizing potential. And that's where local knowledge is really important, because, well, I really believe that we need really good data at the national level, allowing comparative analyses, and that's the kind of thing we do in our research. There are things that kind of data don't pick up, and those will be captured by local knowledge. But it also does mean the appropriate national level frameworks for innovation policy, for industrial policy more generally. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Brilliant. We'll come back to lots in that. You talked about the anchor institution, be interested to explore a bit that more, but then also questions about absorption and diffusion, which often get sort of left behind really in terms of when we talk about innovation, because we're all about kind of very much the invention aspect of innovation. It'd be interesting to get more thoughts on that. Lou, let's turn to you next. You know, you're heavily involved in one of those places, trying to do some of these kind of things, making sure that innovation is happening, R&D investment is happening, but also then it's diffusing through the city region economy of Greater Manchester and beyond. So just your headline sort of big picture thoughts, and we'll get into the detail.
Yeah, will do, Andrew. And like you say, hopefully, I think to complement Anna's kind of macro perspective, maybe I'll try and focus on that frontline kind of regional perspective. So I think, you know, the obviously Greater Manchester generally across not just innovation and R&D has been championing a place-based approach. You can see that in our kind of devolution and our Trailblazer deal most recently. I think what we've learned after several rounds of devolution and you know and quite a long way into that journey is that place-based approach does work. I guess is the overall message from an overall kind of economic perspective. We're seeing that, you know, this kind of flywheel that we're beginning to generate around place-based decision making is overall at this point allowing us to outperform the rest of the UK in terms of growth and productivity. Not that we don't have challenges in both of those areas and an ambition to do more, but we're seeing those kind of green shoots of those policies and those control mechanisms beginning to work. I think in my field in innovation and specifically around R&D, I don't think we see the principles as any different. I think our argument will be, and again, what I see on the front line beginning to kind of implement some of those strategies is that, you know, the answer sits, as Anna said, in the triple helix, you know, and enabling national government to work with local government, to work with business, to work with academic institutions. I think my personal experience in all of those fields is that's really easy to say and actually really complex to deliver. It's quite grunty, it's quite granular, and that's where that very place-based kind of anchor is really useful, because you're dealing with political nuances, personality nuances, individual stakeholders, and the knitting together of that needs to be done often at a very micro level. That said, we have to do that hand in hand with national government that holds some of the big policy levers, some of the big investment levers that are absolutely critical to allowing that to kind of move at pace. So I think that's what we're kind of learning. We've got some practical examples that we've been running over the last couple of years. So the Innovation Accelerator in partnership with Innovate UK, and obviously that's, you know, also been run in Glasgow and in Midlands. We're really getting some learnings again about how that works. We've just launched a city-to-city partnership with Cambridge exactly for some of the reasons that Anna's just alluding to, which is we've got these global hooks, and actually our view is we can get there faster by holding hands together place to place, where we can see complementary sets that are going to be really attractive, particularly from an inward investment perspective. So, largely we're talking about ecosystem design. So that does have to have a kind of place-based element to it. And my general kind of view would be, I think we're all on a bit of a learning curve about this. How it's going to work outside of the Golden Triangle is largely different. And I think we've got some regions that are a bit further along that journey than others. But I think, this is going to be a really critical set of learnings for us to go through over the next few years. I'll maybe share one stat that I absolutely love from my colleague Richard Jones at the University of Manchester, who beautifully illustrates the kind of low-hanging fruit opportunity, if you like, that sits under the kind of levelling up banner, which is, the impact to UK economy of doubling the size of the Cambridge economy could be achieved by growing the Greater Manchester economy by 4%. So that kind of productivity differential, that kind of low-hanging fruit differential is really easily illustrated, I think, by that. And then I'll maybe finish there, Andrew.
That's a great stat. And of course, we would ideally want both of those things to happen. And therefore we get we get the wins all over the place, but it's a very good
hence we're holding hands with Cambridge. It should
scale effects, I think, is a really quite important point to make. Greater Manchester is a big place, and even if we get a little bit of growth, we get a big number on the back of that. Chi, welcome. Good to see you. Give us your thoughts, kind of big picture response. You've been in and around this sort of policy area for a while. Just your thoughts on where you think now we are in terms of the debate, the big picture on the role of R&D, local growth, devolution, levelling up. You're on mute, Chi. There we go.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks very much to the Centre for Cities for organising this webinar and inviting me. But I think the work of the Centre for Cities does in analysing and comparing the economic and other profile of cities is inputs is really, really important. And I'm also really grateful to the work the two speakers before me, and I do know I do know Richard in Manchester, and I've heard him speak on this a number of times. And you say I've been in this policy area for a long time. I think it's probably longer than you imagine, in as much as I decided to become an engineer when I was about 10 in Newcastle, growing up in Newcastle, centre of huge engineering history and heritage. But I never actually got to work as an engineer in Newcastle. The only jobs I could find as an engineer were out in the south or of the UK, or cracked across the world in France and Nigeria and the US, and indeed the kind of the engineering and industrial decimation of many of our regions was kind of the reality of my my youth. And I don't think we've actually had an answer to how to address that. We haven't done the policy work and have to address that. I came into Parliament in 2010. What I would, and I think in many ways, in some ways things have got worse. What is true, and I think is reflected on this panel, is that there is now, thank goodness, I think a greater recognition of the importance of place-based policies, and indeed that direct connection to innovation. And I also, that we have, and our mission in government, should we be elected, Keir Starmer has made it very clear that our first mission in government is to secure, and today's figures show that, once again, on our recession, show once again why that's so necessary, is to secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. And we are not going to do that, as indicated by that stat. We're not going to achieve that without using the talents and the strengths of all of the entire country. And a place-based approach to R&D is fundamental to achieving that. And the other thing which is really fundamental to achieving that, I would say, which is an industrial strategy, which is also something that is missing from the current government. So I recently spoke at the White City Innovation District, and that's just to give that's a great example of how the council, local authority, Imperial College, which is my own college, charities, businesses, and the NHS, so key public and private sector stakeholders, they're coming together to collaborate to bring over 8,000 jobs in highly skilled sectors to the areas. In Newcastle, we are developing our own clusters of capabilities. I'd say without the same level of access to investment, but around sites like Helix, capitalizing on the 2 excellent universities we have in Newcastle alone. And we want to drive forward that agenda in government. We want to see regional economic strength built on having ownership of key levers of economic growth, one of which is certainly innovation. And we want to see regions, but the time has gone to be taking crumbs from Whitehall. We want to see regions building their strong economies, which will be high skill, high productivity, and innovation driven.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Gee, good comments again. We can come back to that and how the interplay between, or the interface between industrial strategy, which is often thought about from a sectoral perspective, or technology perspective, and how that interacts with a place-based perspective. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, Chiba. And Anna, let me come back to you first off. Just say a little bit more around the relationship between sort of national growth ambitions or demands. Leveling up, is that the same thing? Is it slightly not? And then how does that influence how we then think about R&D, investment, and innovation? Are there tensions we need to resolve? Because you talked a little bit about the role of the Greater Southeast versus not. Is that a tension? Is that, I mean, how do we unsquare all of that sort of stuff?
Great. Yeah. So I think at the national level, we know that investment and innovation being part of that is crucial for improving our aggregate performance. But there are many synergies with a place-based approach, simply because so many people live in cities outside of London and South East. And if you can boost productivity there, you will have a material impact on the national picture too. This issue about the Golden Triangle and the rest of the country, it was great to hear this example of the connection between Cambridge and Manchester. Some of the work we've done has highlighted some of the spillovers, which you can measure through kind of citations. And we find actually that some of the research and activities going on in the Golden Triangle actually generates particularly high spillovers for the rest of the country. So in terms of inspiring innovation that happens elsewhere, there are connections and those are happening. So trying to build on that, I think, is a really positive thing. Of course, there are going to be some trade-offs when we think about leveling up, because it's a question of, can every leveling up policy be purely additional, or will there be some displacement? The reality is there will always be some displacement, but we want to aim for an overall additionality, right? So I think it's just really focusing, rather than trying to diminish strengths in places that are strong and we need to maintain that for the national benefit. It's about identifying places where there are strengths that are not being fully realized and where policy can actually make a difference. And those policies might be national level, because there are actually some national level policies that are creating barriers that might inflict specific barriers on particular places. Take planning, for example. Like, we know planning constraints are a particular issue, whether it's to do with housing or infrastructure or lab space in parts of the UK where there is a demand for that development. But it will also be the local levers that mayors or other leaders in cities and regions can actually implement to address specific barriers. And a lot of that is coordination. So coordination between the relevant stakeholders. As Lou said, sometimes those coordination challenges are so complex because of personality. So you do need that local level emphasis. So the last question was about innovation, R&D versus other types of investment. I think the reality is you need all of them, because there's a complementarity. So having an idea through R&D activity to actually have an impact on growth, that needs to be applied, commercialized. And we know actually in the UK, we're particularly good at generating the ideas, either through our research system or through, say, our high-tech startups that are very good at attracting seed capital. But we know then that there are various barriers to fully realizing collaborations between university researchers and firms, or through that growth stage, so the growth stage capital, which can allow small companies to become big employers and value generators in the economy.
Yeah, brilliant. Lou, come in on this. Just your thoughts on this. I mean, particularly, how do you position, Greater Manchester in the national innovation discussion and debate? Is it about, we can do as well as other places if we get X, or, is there a sort of more of a leveling up strand? I mean, how do you position Greater Manchester in all of that?
So I think, I mean, Greater Manchester's slightly different in the sense it's slightly further along that kind of devolution journey and its kind of growth journey than perhaps other places. But I think for us, we'll think about, exactly what Anna's described before. We've got, some exemplar institutions that we get, to play with. We've got some really interesting kind of anchor employers and a great deal of momentum around, things like AI and some of those kind of frontier technologies that we know are going to be important. I think we also are trying to think across borders as well. I mean, we tend to think in these neat boxes, but you look at things like life sciences. In reality, we've got labour markets that flow across from Cheshire and Liverpool, and so I think we also need to think in a slightly more fluid way. But I think we've got a situation where we're the second largest kind of city in the UK. We've got a really important job to do in driving the UK economy in that ambition. I think when you look at how we position ourselves, we've got to think about what the assets are that we've got to play with. So exactly to Chi's point around how does that fit into a local industrial strategy? What have we got to play with, and what's the bit that we would focus on? And again, I think we're relatively clear on, we've got massive strength in advanced manufacturing and materials. We've got huge ambitions and capabilities around green tech and sustainability, massive capability in creative and digital, and then health innovation, because of course we've got 2.8 million people, a kind of devolved health system. So I think we're very clear on our natural sector strengths and how they play into the UK economy. And I think the answer is you don't try and be all things to all people. You stick in the lanes where you've got a chance of being best in class and world class, and then you hold hands with the other bits of the UK and where you can get that complementarity. But I think for us it sits in that blend of working at a national level where we need those levers and where we need that support, and having the levers at a local level to operate in that triangulum that we just described.
Okay, well, we'll come on to those levers as as they are, and what more levers might be usefully devolved or deployed in different places. But Chi, just come in on this, the question about how, when you think about investment in R&D outside of, say, the Greater Southeast, is that still a national growth agenda and objective for Labour, or is that a levelling up agenda? So that's one question, and then I'd be interested in your thoughts about how you see, your desires for a sort of industrial strategy. How does that play into and play alongside a more place-based orientation, and whether that's about what Anna was saying, recognizing the different levers that matter, who holds them, and how they can be deployed. So, Chi, how do you think about that sort of investment outside of the Greater Southeast? The national growth story, levelling up story, one and the same, or what?
It's I think levelling up as a term as being certainly amongst my constituents, you can't say it without them people laughing. So I think let's go. It's part of, as I said, it's part of our national growth strategy, but it has to be reflected and implemented, if you like, and devolved on a place by place basis. And I think the points that Lou and Anna made about understanding the strengths of different regions, and be that in terms of research or science or spin out or environmental strengths, and then also the characteristics of access to capital. So to speak, talk about investment specifically, access to capital is a national story. If you, in as much as, for example, we've got the lowest level of inward investment that we've had for many years. There's such significant business uncertainty in many areas, but it's also a very local story in that the access to capital and some of the challenges and some of the entrepreneurs who might be looking to reinvest successful capital made from startups locally, pension funds, etc. That's a national issue, and it's also a local when it comes to public sector pension funds in particular. So I'm not sure. I think what really comes across is that we need to work, we need to go together at a national and a regional level on this, and that again just is reflected in an industrial in an industrial strategy. And so the government has lots of plans and initiatives like investment zones. Is that a national or a local issue? Is that but what you need is an overarching industrial strategy for innovation. And that does need to recognize local strengths and local conditions. And so the fact that DSIT recently published its innovation clusters map, that's actually, we've been waiting for it, it's about 6 months late, I think. That can be helpful in terms of understanding where our science assets are. But I also, I think it's fantastic that regional mayors and this will have, such as obviously to Andy Burnham, also Steve Rodham, Liverpool setting the agenda by Liverpool's target to invest is 5% of the Liverpool City region GVA. And I know, having looked at her manifesto, Kim McGuinness in the Northeast, if she is elected as the Northeast mayor, she'll be championing innovative industries. So I guess I think it's something we've got to be looking at nationally and regionally and locally. And I always say we have I launched on Friday our STEM for All agenda for more diversity and inclusion in STEM. Innovation should be something that happens to everyone as part of everybody's life and culture. It's not something that happens just in Cambridge. It's not something that happens just as directed just from Whitehall. It's something that we're all responsible for making happen.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, that's definitely to come back to that, because in a sense, I think there's a interesting question around how we make sure that the benefits of any investment in the innovation space, however defined, then diffuses across the economy and across the place, and how we maximize, maybe not literally everybody benefits, but we get as many to benefit as possible. And I just come in on that question. I mean, what does, you've looked at systems elsewhere, what does the evidence tell us around that? How do we ensure that if we're encouraging investment in the innovation space, often at the technology sort of frontier end, or close to the frontier end, how did we then diffuse that across, the economy that those investments are taking place in?
Yeah, so it's challenging, and because it does rely on the general conditions, so the skills base, the ability for firms to grow. So is there the required office space, the lab space? Are there the right characteristics for people to want to live in a place? So highly skilled people to live in a place. So you do need a holistic growth plan for a place, even if what you're looking at is getting the high-tech part of that place to thrive and expand and then benefit the broader population. Actually, I'm involved in the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authorities Advisory Council, looking at these types of issues. So trying to convert some of the significant strengths in innovation to broader, stronger productivity growth in the region, and also allowing some of the communities in that region to be able to participate in that. There's really interesting research that has shown that there's something about exposure to innovation early on in life, even controlling people's own kind of educational or other characteristics. When you're more exposed to innovation early in life, you're more likely to then become an innovator later. So I think a lot of the interventions need to be quite early on. And of course, then you're going to see longer term payoffs. So some interventions early on, but also other things to get the existing workforce, perhaps through on-the-job training or reskilling programs, particularly in new areas where we know we need a lot of a lot of new skills, such as the green transition, for example.
Yeah, no, that's a great, yeah. Trying to think about how the next wave is going to play out, and trying to almost prepare places and people for the next wave as well as the current wave. I think you see that in lots of examples elsewhere, where they seem to be a bit more forward looking than maybe we typically are, or typically have been. Luke, can I question to you on, I mean, come in on that question, but also just unpack a little bit, give us a sense as to the who the big players are in the sort of innovation GM space. What, obviously the universities are there, big companies are there. You talked about, but the combined authority is the public. So just how is that kind of actually happening? How does that then create a sort of system or a set of structures in order to make decisions and make investment happen?
Yeah, so I'll perhaps touch on that kind of inclusive innovation point first, because that's something that's central to our strategy. And I think it's really interesting when you look at, from a global perspective, the more innovative an economy, the more inequality often you see in that economy. So we've got a real challenge with it globally, not just in the UK. I genuinely think the UK now has an opportunity to lead on that. And actually, we don't want another Silicon Valley. We don't want that to be our model. And what we're doing at a kind of regional and a Greater Manchester level is writing that into our kind of success measures, our strategies. So if you look at our MOU, for example, with Innovate UK, we talk about social innovation alongside economic innovation. We would like to think we've got a really strong DNA and heritage in both of those, from inventing computers to votes for women. So I think we're well placed, but I think we'd love to see that championed across the UK. And so when we think about that growth model, when we think about addressing that productivity challenge, when we think about moving forward, it's not at any cost. It's taking the population with us. And I think that brings us onto that kind of devolution point, and why you need those kind of the triple helix working together to enable it. Skills is a really important part of how you enable a more inclusive economy. So the wiring of those opportunities, those jobs, those employers, etc., into the future of our economy, and that's not just young people into the system. That's also, we're going to have a huge amount of our workforce displaced by technology, and that's going to need to be retrained and redeployed into future-facing jobs. So I think for us, skills is a really important part, which is then why you end up exactly as you're kind of alluding to, with quite a complex matrix actually of people who are driving the innovation agenda within the Manchester ecosystem. So we have platforms like Innovation Greater Manchester, which is our kind of triple helix organization, and the way that we work with local government, the way we work with national government, the way we work across our skills providers, which are not just the universities but are our sixth form colleges. We've not got new devolved powers, and Andy as mayor is very passionate on more industry-led skills. So we've now got a whole new board that's helping to drive what a different approach to an employer-led approach to 16 plus education would look like. So and then to Anna's point, that goes all the way through to transport strategy. What are the barriers to young people in the districts of Manchester that don't traditionally participate in the innovation economy, or don't even know the innovation economy exists largely? Well, we give them a free bus pass, and we give them a free tram. So some of these really simple granular things are the difference between somebody leaving their locality in Oldham or Rochdale or Bury and actually coming to find a job and learn more about it. Things like work placements, again, we know that works incredibly well. The earlier you get sight of what those jobs and those opportunities might be, if you are in reality in a third generation long-term unemployed house, you might not even know what getting up every day and going to work is, let alone what a data scientist is, or a UX designer, or a software engineer. So actually those kind of levers, and we've got to work in a very collaborative way at a strategy level and an industrial strategy level and a kind of innovation strategy level, all the way through in our system to the delivery engines like our sixth form colleges, our employers. But largely what we're doing at the minute is sending a very clear signal that it's that inclusive innovation model that is what we're passionate about. and we're attracting
Mhm.
new companies and new people to the region who buy into that, whether that's individuals and talent, whether that's employers who come and say, actually, do you know what, we can now see 20 years in what's wrong with the current model, and we're really supportive of that. So we're wiring it into our strategy and making an over ask of those employers to say, we'll make a commitment to 20 apprentices, to to 10 work placements, whatever that is. So yeah, that seems to be the direction of travel for us.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Chi, I mean, we've had quite a few questions saying, if you are the next government, what are you going to, I mean, insert whatever you want to ask, if you are the next government, what are you going to do about X, Y, Z? But I mean, just in this space, as if you did come into power form the next government, I mean, given what both Anna and Lou have said already, is it a building on what we see already? Is that the sort of model that you would take to try and boost R&D investment to support places to do better than they currently are? Would it be a building on what's there, or do you have a kind of a grander, bigger vision on all of that sort of stuff? What's your take on that?
Well, the answer to both of your questions, the answer to your questions is yes and yes.
Good.
To the extent that certainly, I don't think that we're not starting from a blank piece of paper, and we certainly wouldn't want to be looking to do that. We are studying very closely, all the if you like, the innovation landscape. And a number of ongoing, the reports from, for example, Paul Nurse, Shorzy. There's a number of reports, and we also have commissioned our own report into startups and spin-outs, for example, and also into financial services. So we are. I can say to you, we're not starting from a blank piece of paper. Our intention is to build on what is there. There are problems and issues with what is there, and we have we're very clear that we are going to be a mission-led government, and government therefore needs to be aligned to those missions. But for example, let me just give a specific example, because I could talk about this forever, and I'm not going to. But for a specific example, what one mission is realizing everybody's opportunity. That's a kind of education as well as a based mission. And what we've said, obviously, skills are an incredibly important part of that. So we've said specifically, that we would, we'd give businesses greater flexibility in training their workforce, and that comes to the skills for the day and the skills of tomorrow, which tomorrow is coming at us very quickly. And so we'll turn the failed apprenticeship levy into a growth and skills levy, so that it can be used on a greater range of training courses that businesses tell us they need, so workers can gain new skills. And then the local skills improvement plan would be used to help local areas develop the workforces that they need. And as part of that, not as part of that specifically, but as well alongside that, university collaboration, which must form part of any growth and any local skills improvement plan. But we also need universities, I think we've mentioned this a couple of times, to be working very closely with businesses and making it easier for businesses to sort of grow and spin out of universities, and also for local businesses to engage with universities and benefit from the fantastic skills that there are there. So yeah, we have our really top level missions, but each of those missions has really important implications for how our skills agenda, the growth agenda, the health agenda would be and the local regional devolution agenda would be implemented in practice.
And part of that approach, because we've had a couple of questions around, the nature of investment, and obviously there's a question about the quantum into any particular issue and any particular policy. But part of the response, which definitely merit in, is actually how you deploy existing resources differently and hopefully more effectively as a result of that. That's part of the argument, part of the response, Chi. Is that right? There's always calls for more money or more investment, but there's also
unfortunately the national finances are already in a really bad state, and we've seen in fact we're just discussing that at PMQs further unfunded tax cuts sort of promised by this government. So in terms of, if you like, the quantum, in terms, we have to make sure that we have to do everything we can and more with the funding that we have. And science, particularly I think in science and research and development and innovation, we can learn from what works well elsewhere. In terms of, we have fantastic science. I think we're sort of top 2-3 nations when it comes to science, but not when it comes to commercialization of that research and development. And so that's very much about setting the right culture and agenda nationally, but it's also really about making sure those relationships and networks and that access to finance works on the ground locally, and therefore we can attract more private sector investment, and we can also grow our startups and spin outs, so they don't need to leave the country in order to grow to the point where they start really employing people or manufacturing or all the great things that help us to drive regional and national growth.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think the point about inequality, about innovation economies being more unequal, I think we can really show that isn't that doesn't have to happen.
No, it's not inevitable.
That's not inevitable. Exactly. Thank you.
If it happens, we should recognize that it's not inevitable, and we've in some ways allowed it to happen, and we can make different choices that can mitigate that. I think that is a very important point. Anna, when you look at place-based innovation systems, elsewhere, as it were, and then you look at Britain or the UK, are there obvious sort of mismatches between where, the levers that are important and where they are held or whether they're deployed? I mean, both Lou and she have talked, and you did, but talked a little bit about, skills as being one where we all know it's incredibly important. We all kind of know what we need to do, but getting it done at the appropriate scale is an absolute, can be an absolute nightmare, to be frank. But are there obvious mismatches on that sort of levers front that you see when you look at systems elsewhere, and get Lou maybe to say something on their practical experiences in GM as well?
Well, the big picture is that we know that overall we're more centralized than other places. But of course there's progress in that respect. And now there are elements like adult skills, policies and budgets that are devolved to certain places. So I think we can see that there is this local role. I mean, there's the LSIP, so local skills improvement plans, which different places across the country are implementing. And then when you have more devolved powers, you can do even more with that, in a sense. But this is a process through which industry and stakeholders in places identify the skills priorities. That's really important. Where there's money that can be attached to that to support programs, whether it's reskilling or kind of skilling young people, that's really positive. But I do think there is more role for the national levers there on things like, one of the things that we've proposed is something like a human capital tax credit, which is basically mimicking an R&D tax credit, but for accredited training. And we've proposed trying to do something like that in a small scale way, and properly evaluating it and seeing if it works in areas where it's very easy to identify a skill need and what the accreditation would be. So some green skills, some digital skills would be an example. I think looking now at kind of transitions and change and diversification, this is something I think about a lot with the green transition. And you talked about international examples. One of the international examples that I've often come across has been the Ruhr region in Germany diversifying away from coal versus our own experiences in Wales. And one of the things that has been attributed to in terms of their successful approach was the fact that they had different levels of government working together, and also a very participatory approach with the people there. And they really thought about skills, and they really thought about sectors that people could plausibly work in and that they could boost. Another thing that, just touching on some of the other things that have been mentioned, and this was mentioned also in the Paul Nurse review, which I was on a kind of review board for. It's to do with academic incentives. So other countries such as Switzerland, they have these universities of applied sciences. In the UK, there is now some progress towards more practical or policy-oriented career tracks. For example, I'm on one at the LSE. And the issue here is we don't want to take money away from the pure research. Actually, in terms of our government expenditure on R&D, it's not already high relative to our comparators. But I would say, you know, the big picture is there is a strong case for us to raise public investment in the UK. We've written various reports setting out how, with reformed fiscal frameworks, that could be achieved. But I think given the importance of some of this commercialization, translation, collaboration that we have to convert some of our core strengths into productivity, we should also be thinking about some of the incentives and allowing some academics to be thinking more about, okay, I want to have an incentive here in my own career to work with local businesses and actually see local growth. Currently, the career incentives are very favoured towards global impact, which, as I said, is a very important thing, top journal publications. But it's, you know, a priority here in policy terms is the local impact and the economic impact too.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Incentives matter, right? it's an obvious truism, but nevertheless should always be repeated. We should never shy away from repeating it. Lou, come in on this question. You know, when you talked a little bit earlier on about the levers that you've got, but you also alluded to some of the levers that you'd like to get or to get more of. What would they be? And not least, you know, Chi might be in a position in the not too distant future to have those levers and to throw them your way. So now is the chance. Get that, you know, long list up. I mean, seriously, what are the kind of what are the levers that you think, if only or possibly, or, you know, we've made some progress, but we could definitely make more progress if only we could get hold of it?
Yeah, so I think for us, in a sense, it's kind of more of the same, in the sense that, you know, skills, again, we're on that journey, that's working well, we see the value of that, and that's hand in hand with initiatives like the LSIP program. Transport, we understand the value of being connected to all of the bits of our city region and to the wider north, etc. So again, it will be, you know, more of the same. I think there's a really, really interesting kind of conundrum around not just the kind of role of, you know, commercial R&D in our economy, but also, you know, if we think about this in a missions orientated world, you know, there's going to have to be a fairly innovative approach to delivery of public services. I think the kind of procurement part of that equation, the opportunity, for example, if you think about health innovation, which is kind of front and center, you know, for we have massive challenges like lots of the UK right on our doorstep, but we also have, you know, huge assets. Beginning to think about how we might have more local levers around procurement there is really interesting, you know. So we're going to have a more digitized health service in order to, we're not going to spend our way out of that. That means that's an innovation challenge. That means that there's an opportunity to create new IP, to apply that, for that to be supported through those kind of public service orientated levers that also have procurement capability. So the opportunity to use the reinvention perhaps of our education delivery, of our health delivery, to also create a generation of really smart, future facing, IP rich science and technology led businesses and organizations is really quite exciting. So yeah, I think, you know, that for us, you know, the more of the same is probably the theme. But also on skills, you know, I do think the kind of growth and skills levy, you know, moving away from pension would be really welcomed, allows a more entrepreneurial, agile approach that businesses are going to need to take. And actually, there's some really smart entrepreneurial, you know, independent providers that are doing some of that work really well already, and we need them alongside the sixth forms, alongside the universities, etc., etc. So actually, I think the more that we can allow business to drive that and have flexibility, all of that will be really welcome.
Yeah.
And again, we don't need to do that at a regional level if it's happening at a national level. So, you know, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and your point about consistency and certainty, as well as, you know, other things, you know, again, can't be overstated in terms of the significance and the importance. Chi, just say, we've had a few questions on, can you make real what a sort of, you know, in this space, a sort of missions-led perspective? What would that result in you, you know, in a Labour government doing slightly differently or more or less of in this kind of space? I mean, not talking about everything, because I know it's a broader policy framework, but in the kind of issues that we've been discussing, how does that missions approach, how would that sort of translate then into this area?
Yeah, okay, and I'm afraid I'm gonna have to go after this question because I have to leave somewhat earlier, but it's a big question, but I'll try and give some concrete examples. So the reason why we have a mission-led approach is to give that kind of clear direction. We've had such inconsistency, sticking plaster policies, so many initiatives in different areas, which we've never measured the success of them. Or if they failed, you know, and they generally have failed over the last 14 years. So mission-led government gives you, you know, brings government together to achieve something, you know, quite concrete. And I think you saw that in our life sciences plan for the life sciences, called A Prescription for Growth, that we published about 4 weeks ago, which I recommend. And that was sort of jointly authored by the health team, the treasury team, and the science team, with input from others as well, because that brings, you know, for life sciences to work, for life sciences to grow, which is what we want in this, what we really need both for the NHS and for our economy. So we need to have the right access to capital. And I think to the points we're making about access to capital, in some ways, intelligent capital has to be local, because it has to understand the challenges that particular startup or scale up is facing, and it has to be able to give the right support to it. And so we need to bring that together at the local level with the kind of fantastic expertise that we might have nationally. We need to address the NHS and its diffusion of innovation, life sciences innovation, new therapies, new medical technology. That is a local procurement issue, but it needs to be a national procurement issue as well, to ensure there's a size of market there, so that so that comes back, the life sciences startups can get the access to capital. We have we've said that we'll set up a regulatory innovation office, because some of the barriers can be in regulation, and new products and services growing quickly in certain areas don't have a dedicated regulator. They may be subject to many different regulators. So and also planning reform, which is needed to get Britain building again, but also to ensure that we have the right kind of lab space, which is quite complex, for life sciences startups across the country. So it's all, you know, all comes together in a joined up way around that aim and ambition. And there is so much that we need to reform. And I think the opportunity that technology and science is we talked about offers is huge, the NHS, but also in public services more generally. And the mission-based government will help make sure that joined up in the department that I'm in, the shadow department. Science, innovation and technology is a real sort of delivery arm of that. And I'm afraid with that, I am going to have to leave, but thanks very much.
No, thank you very much, Chi. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Good to have you with us. Take care. Anna-Lou, let's just, we've got 5 minutes left. Just give a big question to end in. Why not? Just come back to this point around, so you touched on it just now, Anna, which is the argument for raising the level of investment. And I suppose the question is, what would we be saying to government in terms of, you know, some sense of the criteria for allocating the existing and or the additional investment? You know, kind of I talked a little bit at the beginning. There are different models out there for the way that the allocation happens. One based around existing excellence, one based around catch-up potential, which, you know, maybe that's where Greater Manchester is, like, you know, query, question. There's others then about actually it's a left behind criteria. Places that are really struggling should be getting more R&D investment to kickstart their economies, etc. And it's probably all of the above. But I mean, how do we way through that? I mean, what does the evidence tell us? You know, what would you be wanting to say to, you know, to the next government around this kind of thing?
Thank you. So I think there is a strong case to raise the overall public investment in R&D. But then, as you say, the allocation of that, I think excellence has to be really fundamental here, because we want the money to fund things which, as we said, can contribute to national growth, as well as all those spillovers across the country, which then will actually benefit regional growth too. But the reality is that probably there is excellence that traditional assessment techniques doesn't always identify outside of the Golden Triangle. So I think the key here is to ensure that the data are there to really understand excellence. Sometimes it might be that there's some potential to leverage more an investment in a place that perhaps hasn't had as much investment before. But I think generally R&D as a strategy to help left behind places isn't likely to work. And that's because you've got to focus on more of the basics, the skills, the diffusion of innovation, getting firms and workers to be more productive. And then you'll actually start seeing, perhaps, if firms are starting to adopt more technologies, they might have more demand to actually do R&D themselves, etc. So I think it has to be this balance. Excellence is really important to make sure that the money is going to the right places, the types of innovation that can really make a difference internationally, nationally, and for places. But we just need to make sure the criteria that we have in place can identify where that excellence is, and it's not always going to the same places.
Very good, very good. Lou, your thought, you know, on this, in a sense of, you know, there's a quantum question, but there's an allocation question, and how we think about that, and some of the honesty that we probably need around where it's not applicable because of the nature of the intervention.
I think you're right, and some of this is politically uncomfortable, isn't it? Especially as, you know, we potentially head into an election, and we understand that. I think we, for a long time, argued in support of Anna's point, which is that there is a very clear case for increased public sector R&D spend. I think it is a really important question about the criteria. I think from my own perspective and what we would champion is a kind of maximising the impact argument, which I think, you know, it's fairly difficult to escape then looking at those concentrations across the UK that have those key assets that in relatively near term can deliver some impact to UK economy. And so, you know, I mean, Centre for Cities has documented this argument well. You can see where those clusters are. You can see now, you know, with the benefit of things like the cluster maps, some of the nuances of what those capabilities are and what those assets are. But, you know, I think a kind of jam spreading approach of, you know, distributing it fairly and hoping that R&D does all of the problem solving everywhere in every location is just not going to work. So I think we should be concentrating on those centres where we know we can have impact. But what we can do is invest in the connectivity then, both through skills and transport connectivity to those major centres, and allow them to do that heavy lifting and that driving, but make sure that they are accessible, you know, psychologically and literally accessible to everybody across the UK. So I think that's definitely the approach we would advocate. Excellent.
A very, very good point, or points on which to finish. We definitely could go on, but it's 2 o'clock, so we need to come to a close. So thank you to my two panelists that are still with us, Anna and Lou. Thank you very much, Lou and Anna, for your time. And she obviously, although she's gone, thank you very much for her time as well. It's great to see you all. Thank you all for being on the call and for the questions. Got through some of them, not all of them. I apologise for that. But we'll be back shortly talking about density, housing, and how all of that matters from a whole range of different issues in the third of our series of Urban Futures with the LSE. So I look forward to that. Until the next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.